Welcome back to Story Time with Beth and Ophelia Immune, words that I own the rights to, so I can just give them on out. I hope you are having a great day. Hydrate, stretch. If you have to sit for long periods of time, do it on a yoga ball chair. Also, if anything gets too tense in the book, I will just bounce on the chair, yoga ball chair, to lighten things up. And I'm at my desk now, in my room. So I'm now wearing a scarf, but I don't have a blanket on me, but I do still have big crinkle blankets behind me. Many blankets. One of them is electric because I run very, very cold. I also have an electric heater on my feet. We have some natural lighting coming in, some autumn colors drifting in for us. My childhood and my kids' childhood keyboard. Oh, fully on. So if we need any musical interludes, that's available. I have lots of fidgets on my desk, which my students and coworkers have already told me that they can hear when I accidentally try to hide it out of sight, so they can't see me playing with it, but they tell me that the sound still shows up. So I bet we can hear that via the microphone right now. I have a little Play-Doh statue of me made by my daughter. I think the hair is maybe the most accurate. Okay, so settling into an autumn afternoon. Have a different kind of beverage. Support local whenever possible. I live near-ish this brewery. The carbon footprint of getting this beer to me is extremely low. Though the skull sign on here is accurate. Dear artists, we do not need as many substances as we use. I just happen to not have had any substances that are, as bad for me as sugar and alcohol in the last couple days. I don't have my kids around. I already put in a full day managing grants for an anti-racist women's organization. So I feel like I have earned my one beverage here. It's a very delicious Oktoberfest that is supporting local. So even if artists need to back off our substances a little bit, it's a very karmically solid beverage. Probably more karmically sound than the coffee I drank earlier, which was not fair trade. Welcome back to Storytime. I'm going to take out my civilized bookmark. I marked the paragraph where I stopped with a folded corner. And I keep a lot of highlighters and pencils over here on my desk. Unless it's a library book or a book that you have to give to someone else or that you don't want to influence their reading of, I say make yourself notes, fold pages, figure out where you are in the book. We left off in this book in what is the second chapter, called The House. And it got kind of long and I ran out of coffee, so that's where we're going to pick up. They'd just gone to sleep in their first night in their new house, which is both exciting and terrifying. Dad only got up twice during the night, to stand up in the boots that he never removed and sneak down the stairs to kill zombies in the yard. In the morning, we woke to the sounds of Mom scrubbing, then snapping our clean clothes above a wash bucket and hanging them to dry on a rope stretched across the living room. When Dad saw us dawdling downstairs, he whistled to call Hector, Juliet, and I out onto the lawn to see what his night had been like. Mom grumbled about this, but it was safe because Dad said so. The long grass was still bent with dew, and it wetted us up to our knees in a humid spring balm. 2 bodies lay in the grass, both belly up as Dad had left them, finally at peace from their wanderings. I gripped Hector and Juliet tightly, away from the corpses. I felt my empty pants loops and wished that I had grabbed my hammer and my new axe to stand this close to contagion. I thought about running to get it from our bedrolls, but I didn't want Dad to notice that I had forgotten them in the first place. Foolish. One of the ex-humans sprawled before us had been an elderly woman, and one had been a teenage boy. Both had smashed temples where Dad had hit them. One day, while they had been hanging their laundry out to dry, or painting over the rust spots on their vehicles, a zombie had snuck up on them and sank its teeth into them, or they had seen it coming and didn't know how to fight it, or there were too many and the humans lost the fight. The ex-old woman's thin calico dress and ex-teenage boy's grubby denim overalls had offered no protection at all. Zombie teeth ripped right through their clothes, injecting sickened spit into their wounds. Then they turned into the same abomination, almost green, always hungry, lips always pulled back in search of something that moved or smelled good or made interesting sounds. Their families had been too cowardly or too dead to do them the favor of killing them, and they had wandered alone and miserable, scratching oozing gouges and festering valleys into their legs as they wandered dumbly together, until Dad gave them their peace. He pointed around their wrinkles and pimples with the handle of his crowbar. See? Here is how that blow killed them, right through the skull. Hitting them lower in the guts won't kill them. They bleed from there, but only as a pile of goo. They are all mush and bones below the head. You have to crush the brain. And then to be sure it won't get up and come after again, you have to cut off the head, just to be sure. Then, even if the jaws still snap, at least they can't get up and chase after you. We watched him cut off their heads and throw them in the stream down the hill to keep them well separated from the bodies until he could clear an area for a proper burn pile. Ophelia, you help me keep the little ones out of this stream. The virus that makes the undead can't live in the water, but zombies can. And fish, too. Juliet and I shuddered. If you ever see a fish, you do not touch it. Ever. If anyone offers you a fish, you run away and tell me or your mother. Immediately. They are not safe. Do you hear me? Fish are dangerous. They started this zombie plague. Juliet nodded and focused on the lesson. I clenched Hector's hand until he looked up, and he nodded too. I wondered if he was listening. He should be listening. Fish could make you sick faster than a bite to the throat. Everyone knew that they could. In drawings, on warning signs, they look evil, pale and slimy, slippery foul creatures with white bellies, gray-green scales, and dead vacant stares. But I had never seen a real one. Most of them had been killed when the plague had started. Fish probably don't even exist anymore. Okay then, Dad clapped his hands. Go help Mom with chores. I sprinted across the yard, encouraging the kids up into the house and to use all of their muscles to scramble up the stairs. I collapsed in a pile with them on my lap near the blankets that Mom was trying to shake free of dust from the car, from the floor of the new house. When we shook and folded and swept, she told us stories of televisions and shopping malls and vacation travel, while Hector and Juliet poked each other and jostled for the best view of the lawn. From the window we could see Dad clearing a spot for the new burn pile. We didn't have to boil our water before zombies came. We just filled up crystal clear, real glass glasses with cold water right out of the spouts in the kitchens, with no pump handles. Water shaped like tulips. The stoves worked and the refrigerators kept things cold as ice year-round. Food stayed in the same buildings as people because nothing was chasing after good smells. Good smells like you! She reached out to pinch our scrawny legs. We screamed and laughed and rolled in the blankets that she had just cleaned. She shooed us back out of the house and put us to work cleaning out the old woodshed that she wanted to turn into a kitchen. It took us a whole week. Hector, Juliet, and I hauled the rotted wood to the new burn pile to see if it would burn, but it barely moldered. We trapped one rat who had lived underneath the pile, and we did use him for soup. Dad dragged the stove from the house outside and set it on top of an old steel ring that was already sooty from bonfires. He propped a pipe like a chimney out of its back and through the green ruffled roof, so that Mom could cook by burning wood in the bottom ring and draw air that would make the oven hot. The first thing she baked in the kitchen were cookies with the real, refined sugar instead of with honey. We ate every single crumb of the cookies, and Dad dipped his in a fresh cup of coffee. Mom was concerned when Dad revealed that he had traded a whole bag full of nails and screws for the fancy coffee from God knows where. But he said that it was important to have quality beans in his life, and he winked at me as he said this because he liked to call us his beans. Mom said that if he ever managed to trade for a cow and some salt, she would use those beans to make some coffee ice cream that people used to come and taste. Or the people would want to come and taste all the way from Chile. That's true, that's true. Virginia, you do make amazing ice cream. Ophelia, take a sip of my coffee here and imagine it cold and creamy and sliding slowly off a spoon. Your mom will make ice cream someday, and you can all taste it. The coffee was as bitter as a thimble of Ranger's moonshine, but I marked Chile with a brown coffee bean on my big map, which I tacked onto the wall in my bright sky blue day room, with halves of bent and broken nails. It looked perfect, the oceans matching the paint. I pounded 2 hooks to hang my blue hammer basking in the enclosed indigo walls. Dad knocked the secret knock and surprised me by dropping 2 more hooks into my open palm, grinning with his eyebrows in his hair. For my axe? For your axe, he confirmed. I'm ready now, I said seriously. I'm sorry there's anything to be ready for, Ophelia. Instead of hugging or high-fiving me, his head hung down to his chest. I don't know if you can be ready. I don't know how to... There are some things you can never be ready for. Your sister Imogen, you and Hector and Juliet. I just want to keep you safe, and I can't. There is no safe anymore. I wrapped myself around his belly. I can help. I can help keep us safe. You always help, Ophelia. You help me every day. He wiped his eyes, patted me on the back. Come on, he said. Let's get back to chopping wood for that new oven. Not only were there 3 endless trees to chop so that Mom could bake in her new kitchen, keeping all of its enticing smells and sounds far from the place that we would try to sleep, but there was an overgrown garden that Mom had started to weed while we had been carrying wood. She found beans and peas and tomatoes and carrots and corn and melons and squash of all kinds. No way was this a bachelor pad, she grinned and grinned. Some wonderful lady planted all this for us and just left it here. Dad cut the grass all around it with a scythe that he had found behind the shed and had scraped off the rust and sharpened with a whetstone. Then he mowed the grass with a rotary mower until it was short enough to prickle our toes and soles with every step. And we could see all around our green and garden, 50 yards in every direction, the house to the west, the driveway curling north beyond it, the kitchen slightly uphill to the north, trees, trees, and more trees, plenty of them with apples to the east, and downhill to the south, a steep bank, and then the cold water creek that we all avoided, in case there were any fish. I relished chopping wood into kindling on the stump in the center of the yard, next to the garden, where I could watch over everyone. I could see Mom in the kitchen, at the top of the hill, struggling to build shelves herself, and a counter, and scolding Dad when he tried to help. I can do it myself, damn it! I can do this. Go watch the babies. I'm watching the babies, I called. I could see Hector and Juliet picking the smaller weeds amongst the vegetables, the ones that popped up every night and blocked the sun and water from our precious food's roots. I could see Dad behind the garden, before the trees, hauling a body to the burn pile on a flat metal sled with a chain handle. It was a heavy sled, but he found it for free in the yard, and it kept his hands, even in gloves, off of the infected flesh whenever he caught a beast trying to stumble onto our property. Chopping wood was difficult at first. I missed more than I hit the wood, and I barely made it split. My arms were so weak. Even with gloves on, I gave myself blisters, and blisters on top of those blisters. They popped and oozed and seeped into the wash rags that Mom wrapped around them. And they healed into calluses, and my arms and my back started to turn into weapons that could actually crack a skull if they had to. Wood was my target practice and my exercise. Spring drifted away as the wood pile grew. We put a canopy of woven tree branches over it, helping it to stay dry in the early summer storms. As it started to grow hot and sunny, Mom set Hector to work picking. As it started to grow hot and sunny, Mom set Hector to work, picking things as they ripened. First only lettuces, then early peas, radishes, asparagus, and small beans. Juliet scrubbed them in pails full of water and passed them to Mom, who sometimes wrapped them in damp towels, or strung them to dry, or put them into jars of vinegar for canning. Dad walked past and pointed a happy finger at Hector. "Such great beans I've got!" Hector hooted and screeched. He stooped his knobby mahogany back under the blazing morning sun to pick a handful and hold them up, dancing giddily. He dropped them into his bucket, and then he copied the noise that each made. He was pretty good at mimicking their pling-twang, pling-twang, better than he was at speaking actual words. There were plenty of leaves hiding behind the tiny beans to keep restless 5-year-old fingers and eyes busy. It could be hard to find the light yellow, dark yellow, green yellow, short, plump, and skinny string ones that looked like him, hidden among the twigs. Birds and rabbits kept eating the berries and nibbling on the melons and carrots. Dad tried wrapping them in a curl of wire mesh to keep them out, but we didn't know yet if it would work. But corn, squash, radishes, turnips, tomatoes, sunflowers, and sour crab apples were growing even faster than the weeds. Mom had high hopes for potatoes, too. "We may not even have to spend much on flour and rice to get our starches," Mom boasted. "But we'll be able to," Dad replied. "Once I start fixing things for money. As soon as this place is ship-shape, I'm going to head into town and see who needs to fix what." Their eyes gleamed when they looked around the yard, not just checking for zombies, but proud of their purchase and plotting. Dad struggled with rusty bolts to affix a large pump handle to an old water well that used to run on electricity. He tossed the electric pump into the stream with the heads and said it was about as useful and reminded us not to go poking around down there. I nodded, kept working on turning my blisters into calluses. Hector kept picking, walking buckets of beans over to Mom, who strung them up to dry or boiled them and stuck them in firmly sealed jars, locked in the big wooden cabinet next to the crabapple sauce that was simmering. Juliet filled a small pail with water from the new pump and then sprinkled it around the bases of the plants with her slender fingers. Dad came back from the woods, having found and dragged a freshly downed sapling that we could dry for kindling. But he was happier and stepping higher than just a small pile of kindling would warrant. "What is it?" I asked. "Hurry," he called to me. "Come on, grab some of these boards." Juliet and I rushed to Dad's side. We propped the rough selvage boards from the old shed and slapped them into a tall, rectangular tube where he had pointed. He pinned them with only 2 straight nails per board per corner. We left the bottom open, propped on the little branchy legs, and we made a lid, but we didn't put it on top yet. Lastly, Dad wrapped a dry towel around a green stick that he held in the oven until it started to burn, and then he ran, his torch held high. "Quick! Come on!" Hector joined us as we galloped along behind Dad to the foot of a giant oak, well into the woods, well away from the safety of our highly visible yard. "There it is! Do you see it?" My heart beat up into my sinuses, unsure what to expect. He pointed 20 feet above our heads, hanging in the lush green canopy, a twisty, windy ovaloid about the size of a human head. It was a beehive. A few inhabitants buzzed slowly in and out of their front door, calm and blissfully unaware that they had been discovered and plotted against. Hector was the best climber of the three of us, his chief skill along with bug following and talking to squirrels. So he followed Dad up the tree, holding a smoking torch where Dad directed him. After they smoked the hive for several never-ending minutes, Dad leaned even closer to the branch where the hive hung, and he made a low, slow, smooth cut with a sharp saw that he had carried in his belt. The spare end of the branch, with its leaves and twigs, fell first. Juliet and I hauled it out of the way to dry for more kindling. Hector held one hand of the smoking torch under the hive and one on the free side of the branch as Dad slowly cut through the thicker tree side of the bee's branch. When it was almost free, he wriggled and twisted away the last of the connecting shreds. He shooed Hector down the tree first and climbed carefully down after, miming more than actually touching the tree at all. He winked at me and motioned for all of us to be quiet. We took great pains to be an almost silent parade back to the makeshift hutch behind the kitchen. Dad lay the torch under the hutch so that the smoke drifted up through the top like a chimney. Carefully, he set the branch ends across the hutch's top opening and placed the lid down on top of the branch, pinching the stick in place with a large lumpy rock on top of it. Finally, he gave us the signal that we could abandon our silence. I threw my hands in the air and I cheered. "We did it!" Dad declared. "We have easy honey." Hector hooted and Juliet danced with me. Mom stepped out on the kitchen steps. "What is this racket? What is going on? Is everybody okay?" Dad did a little waltz with Juliet in his arms and leaned in for a kiss from Mom. "We just set up a beehive. We'll have honey, free sugar for anything you want to make," he told her. Her smile stretched from ear to ear, but she composed herself and swatted at us with her wooden spoon. "Pull yourselves together, honestly." She gave each of us a kiss and went back to cooking. The sauce smelled too wonderful to keep Juliet away from the oven. Mom tripped on her castle of sticks, so she cursed and tethered Juliet on the far side of the kitchen with a short piece of soft rope. The rope kept her from touching the stove or wandering out of sight, but Juliet frowned indignantly and picked at the tether she was too old for. At 4, she was the most civilized of all of us, just as Imogen had been. Dainty with her fine features and thoughtful gaze, she was smart enough not to wander off while Mom chopped tomatoes and I chopped wood. She knew to stay close to me. Hector was the one standing on his overturned pail, reaching for another tree branch to climb. He had already forgotten about all the beans and was busy jumping at leaves and bugs. Dad called me to the kitchen door. "As you can see," he whistled at Hector to get back to work, "we grown-ups," I blushed at this verbal reward, "we need to make this beehive sturdier, and then I think we'll need even another distraction to keep zombies away from the little beings who advertise themselves in the house at night. The smells of the kitchen are a great start, and the buzzing of bees will help, but the undead like bigger noises too, like us on the second floor. We have to give them something to keep them away from the house while we're sleeping. What do you think?" I agreed. Chapter 3. The Funeral. Drink local. The funeral. Dad and I built a weighted pendulum that softly pounded on the inside of the kitchen wall. When it was wound and positioned behind the locked door, it sounded like something small and edible wiggling. To pull the ghouls to it all night long, far away from the rest of us in the house. And in the morning, when we checked our work, we found 4 zombies huddled around the kitchen, smearing themselves across the reinforced walls, exactly where they wanted them. Far from us. I offered Dad a high five, but he frowned at me. "This is not for fun, Ophelia. These zombies were somebody's children." "But they're not anymore," I reminded him. "Those people are gone now." He sighed deeply. "That tall, skinny one there, it used to be one of the Clover boys from down the road. Nice people. They traded me a pound of nuts and bolts for a small jar of applesauce. They used to have 4 boys. 2 of them died of the croup. This makes the 3rd dead boy. They only have one left. These zombies are not people, and we have a duty to put them to rest, but they still have families. They still have parents. I will take care of this ex-Clover boy and make it neat for the family. Ophelia, do you think you can handle the other 3? The other 3 were decrepit strangers out of the woods, slow and half fallen apart. I nodded that I could handle it. Of course I could. Dad tipped the ex-neighbor boy over on its side and drove a very narrow metal stake through its temple until it was still. The other 3 zombies came directly for me when I clapped to call them away from Dad. Pardon me. I stopped, letting my shiny blade dangle limply at my side. I held it ready. It felt so heavy and my arm so paper light. I swung it wildly at the enormous zombies as they reached for me, pawing at the air in my shirt, streaking it with their inky goo. Airy swing after airy swing, I missed them with my sharpened club, and they missed me with their sharpened teeth. And then I didn't miss. My axe cut through the air, and then not just the air. I saw a hand lying on the ground. I swallowed and swallowed until my mouth was bone dry and I'd almost backed out of the lawn and into the trees. I swung again and again, and then connected solidly with the skin above one of the zombie's ears. I kept going as quickly as I could, hitting more and more important body parts, shaving them down. When they stumbled down to the grass, I chopped at them until they stopped writhing and grabbing and twitching. They barely had any neck stumps left. I frowned at my trail of mangled and messy, truly dead parts. I wiped a black smudge off of my hand and onto my pants. I tried not to think about that one ranger I had seen get goo on an open cut on one of her fingers, shaking with a fever as soon as she saw it there. But I didn't have any open cuts on my hands this time. I should be fine. It's nice to know I can count on you, Ophelia. Dad patted my shoulder and strode away to get the tarps. I blinked until I could see again. At the funeral, the Clovers told everybody how stand-up and decent we were, how we had returned their ex-son to them wrapped cleanly in our best tarp, face not even destroyed, so that they could see him one last time before they burned him. Mrs. Baker scowled to hear all this, pale and prim in a high-collared dress. But by the light of the flickering pyre, everyone else saw us standing upright and honorable as neighbors, not just driving newcomers who traded for all the best stuff in their county. Most of them didn't hate us for being new. Though that didn't stop the older girls from torturing me at night in the church on the 3rd floor where all of the older kids slept for big events. The church was full of people sleeping over after the funeral, before the breakfast feast in the morning. The breakfast feast only happened because the hiking townies didn't want to sleep in trees overnight on their way home. I wish we had just driven home after the funeral. I wouldn't have cared if we'd been rude to the townies without cars. I had work to do at the house, things far more important than listening to the older girls gossip for hours and hours. I wondered if the older boys were having more fun sneaking around in the attic and the bell tower. Anything would have been more fun than being trapped with older girls. They had all grown up on their farms near Nasmith. They were all tall, none of them as brown as me, not even the quiet girl with the longest, thickest braid I'd ever seen, whose family had been this far north for eons. I wondered if they had teased her before I came along. "Hey, driver," they taunted me. "Stupid land stealer." They called me names: backseat brat, road trash, filthy four-door dork, and other names in the speech of the North that I couldn't understand. But their tone was as disgusting as the remarks they did let me hear. When I grew tired of trying to track their barbs, I listened to the grown-ups on the floor just below, tending to the little ones and ignoring the hurricane of teenagers upstairs. God! A round girl with dark lipstick shouted so that I would notice her. "Did you see her little brother? He's so interesting. He's going to end up just like that last Clover boy. Interesting. Tethered for bait like a baby." The only boy that the Clovers had left was a teenager like us, But something was different with him. He had never been bitten, but his head didn't work like anybody else's. His family had to keep him tied up so that he couldn't wander away and get eaten without noticing. And the older girls thought that Hector was just like him, the poor, interesting Clover boy. It made me like the remaining Clover boy. I heard a slight rhythmical banging on a pipe below. It was to the tune of one of Hector's favorite songs. I wondered if he had stolen a wrench and if he was humming as he went, but I rolled my eyes at the older girls anyway. One of her friends stepped over to me and peered down at my blanket from above her ample cleavage. I hid my mostly flat chest and my pink-flowered nightie under the covers. I bet you can't even kill a zombie, can you? You didn't kill that ex-Clover boy that we burned, did you? I shook my head. But I have killed some, plenty. 3 while my dad dispatched that one. Daddy? The girl mocked. Did you say daddy? I'm getting married in a week and she still calls her old man daddy? She turns 16 next month, another piped up. But let's see how much her daddy loves her then. Sooner or later, even if she's a driving shrimp, she'll start bleeding like the rest of us and draw the monsters right up to the house at night. I bet he'll sell her then. Not that she's worth much. I rolled over in my sleeping bag, turning my back to them. I wasn't scared of red blood, and Mom wasn't either. Dad loved both of us and would never sell us to anybody. He hated girl sellers as much as he hated zombies. I was never going to leave Juliet alone with older girls like this. I pitied these older girls with their mean fathers. I hid my inflamed ears underneath my rag pillow. Aw, time for Biddy Baby to fall asleep. They made cooing noises. A foot nudged me sharply in the ribs as it padded past the bathroom. I scoffed at the small bruise it would leave and pulled my flannel wrap further over my head while they stayed up late discussing which of the older boys they'd like to have babies with. What was the point of not getting sold if they were just going to volunteer to be slaves anyway? I woke earlier than all of the rest of them, still gagging on their gossip. I wrinkled my nose in disgust as I folded my bedroll to sneak downstairs and help the grown-ups with breakfast. I stepped on their blankets with my sneakers, shaking dried mud onto them as I passed. I laughed quietly at them at the feast when their mothers sent them to thank us for the delightful applesauce that Mom had provided for the pancakes. Only the pale baker girl was immune from her mother forcing to thank us politely. Juliet was impressed that I let her stick out her tongue at so many people when Mom wasn't looking. Hector didn't notice. He was too busy shoveling pancakes and applesauce into his mouth to notice that the only other person not being careful to share was the remaining, rocking, interesting Clover boy to his left, 6 times his size and still tethered to the picnic table like a toddler. Very interesting, the girls hissed at me. But Hector had long outgrown tethers, and he was right to scarf down Mom's crabapple sauce. It was delicious. He was unusual, but he wasn't as interesting as the Clover boy. Even if they were, they both had good taste. The pancakes and applesauce were incredible. Mom's crabapple sauce was perfect for sweetening things, and I knew that if we had any extra flour, Mom would have offered to make me a syrupy cake for my birthday. But instead of flour, we had bags and bags of rice right now. Many of them plunked heavily onto my lap for the drive home. They made booster seats for Hector and Juliet. We pulled slowly away from the church parking lot, giving Mom time to accept more gracious thank yous. She smiled and waved at the towny hikers and mentioned to me, without moving her lips, not to be such a tomboy, and it's not very nice of you to let Hector make faces out of the car window. He had finally caught on that I was allowing face-making, and there was no way I was going to stop him. In fact, I reminded Juliet to keep going and pointed out the older girls along the way. Mom was too busy waving to scold us. While she was in a good mood from the compliments, I asked if we could celebrate my birthday with rice and butter and honey instead of cake. Even though we didn't have much butter either, she said yes without a second thought, and then she paused to ponder something else, bringing her fingers to her lips and tapping in sets of 4. As we were all snuggling into bed for the night, she smiled, smoothed out our blankets, and said what was on her mind. It's 6 weeks until Ophelia's birthday. I think we should have a party. When the bedroom grew silent except for Hector's humming and tapping, Mom's eyes were twinkling. When I turned sweet 16, I wore a new pink full-length tulle dress to a dance thrown for me by my favorite uncle. It was in a hotel ballroom with a buffet and a live band and all of my friends. I would love to throw a picnic next month, done up right, with plenty of food, and Ophelia in a dress. Ophelia, you even have an uncle within a few days' journey. It would do us all some good to remember that we have some family. It would help make us better friends with all of our neighbors. I pictured all of the older girls at our party, forced to say thank you to us again. A birthday better than their weddings ever would be. I didn't want to wear a dress, but I wanted to show off the huge wood pile that I'd built. Dad pinched the bridge of his nose and squinted. I don't think it's a good idea to have that many people around, making noise, tempting all the creatures. Don't discourage Ophelia, Mom chided. After spending her entire life in a car, she could use a break to enjoy the life that we finally have. Dad looked at the floorboards. He looked at me. I tried to make my face less hopeful, but it was too late. He saw that I wanted a party, and in a flash of guilt, he pictured me in the back seat with Hector and Juliet. He forced a smile and agreed. I wondered what kind of nightmares he would have tonight, but he chuckled and reminded all of us that my Uncle Donnie was really more of an older, sleazy husband of a cousin who was in fact my age. Mom pursed her lips about the sleazy uncle comment, but she was too pleased at the thought of a party to be mad. I wondered if she was planning my wedding just like the parents of all those other girls. Whatever. When they showed up, I'd be more impressive with my acts than they could ever be with their boring, smelly future husbands. Mom, I asked, can I invite all of the older girls to the party? Of course, yes, we'll invite everybody. I tore off my little kid's pink flowered nightie and wrapped myself in my biggest, most grown-up flannel shirt. I stuffed the pink nightie under my rag mattress and pulled my little sister to me, clutching her against the evening chill. Hector was drumming his fingers on the cool window pane when we fell asleep and again when we all woke up. Hector, my friend, Dad called, lacing his boots. Help me dig a foundation for a gazebo. We're going to have a party. Juliet, Mom said, come to the kitchen with me. You can use Ophelia's crayons to decorate invitations. Ophelia, would you bring your crayons and cut some of the scrap cardboard into squares before you chop more wood? Sure, Mom. The weather grew muggy and then miserable and sweaty. The mosquitoes flew in clouds and the stream gushed over its banks, swallowing the southern third of the yard. We were on the constant lookout for things with wide, watery eyes and slack jaws, fish or zombies, wading through the submerged lawn. Dad removed the big glass window panes from the house and stored them in the kitchen loft, replacing them with mesh screens so that we could enjoy a breeze without the bugs. Hector and Juliet came down with a summer fever. Mom called it wobblepox and said it wasn't serious. Don't worry. She said all kids get it once and then we're done with it. She made sure that I hugged them and entertained them a lot, but I never got the itchy bumps or silly walk that gave the pox their name. She frowned that I wasn't going to catch it and be done with it, but she tried to reassure me that no matter how short I was, I'd never been sickly and I should count that as a blessing. After their fevers broke, Juliet and Hector were both itchy and stumbling across the bedroom. All 5 of us giggled at their poor balance and speckled cheeks. Aside from slapping their scratchy fingers away from their splotches, we didn't have anything to worry about. But why don't I have the wobble pox? I asked again, still checking my arms for blisters, jealous of all that honeyed water that they were drinking, and another rite of passage that I had managed to miss. I don't know. You must be immune, Ophelia. Dad congratulated me on my sturdy inner ear that wasn't susceptible to these germs, but I would have much rather been tucked snugly alongside the little kids, munching on rice crackers until their fevers were low enough to run outside and play again. Let's go, Ophelia. The air's dried out, and we only have 3 weeks left until your birthday. I want to frame a gazebo and cut some sod from the edges of the yard to patch all the muddy holes near the house. I trudged behind his wheelbarrow, garden shovel in hand, rolling and unrolling grass swaths until he thought that I had the knack of it, and then he left me to the landscaping while he squared and nailed the frame of a gazebo that he was building. He whistled while he worked, and no matter how crabby I was to be missing honeyed water, it was better to have him as a peer than to be eating all of the free sugar that I wanted. "How does it look, Ophelia?" he called from atop a support beam. "Looks great." I smeared a clod of mud across my forehead when I tried to wipe away my sweat. "Don't worry, Bean. When I'm finished with this gazebo, we'll all sit up here with honeyed water. Nothing to repair if the zombies walk through at night. Just a big, gorgeous porch with benches that we can use to enjoy our view, before, during, and after the party." I whistled as I worked after that, too. Having a strong immune system and building the future was better than getting pampered for being sick. Doing yard work and stomping on the sod gave me an excuse to be barefoot and pretend that the older girls were blades of grass. Dad was starting on the birch shingles when the only zombie that we had seen all day crawled out of the woods. I shoved my feet into my sneakers and whipped my laces into knots. "You got that one, Bean?" "Yeah, I got it. It's just crawling." It was a naked, ex-teenaged girl zombie, struggling to pull itself into the yard, slipping on the grass. It had dragged its pale, bare, green belly across a rough knot on a log, and the new cut on its belly oozed sticky, black, ex-blood from its distended organs. It had been feeding. Its face was plastered with maroon crust and brown fur. It didn't have fingertips, just 10 equal-length scratching stubs, working their way closer and closer to my feet. Its only prize was a pair of shiny keys clenched between broken knuckles. I stood in front of it, watching the raw bones in its knees and the unhealing crack in its back. It had been crawling for a while. That was probably what had happened to its clothes. They had probably been scraped off on rocks and branches that it had crawled over, or torn off by whatever it had been eating. I felt badly that it had no bra. It took such a tremendously long time to grow into a bra. It seemed particularly unjust that its sapling breasts had to scrape across sticks and weeds while I clubbed its head in. I whispered it assurances that it was no longer human, and what I was doing to it was a kindness. It didn't look up. Its head was stuck in the down position, gazing permanently at its own crooked arms and inverted elbows until it collapsed. Its fair, freckled bottom unabashedly mooning me, its black, sludgy X-brains coating my hammer. It didn't even twitch when I rolled it onto the tarp, its keys jingling sadly in its stiff fist. It slumped on top of the burn pile with the other half-decayed corpses waiting to be burned. I soothed the grass back into a standing position where I had dragged the body across the sod. Hector wandered past me wearing nothing but his bib overalls. He stumbled a bit and was still scratching at pockmarks, so I leaned over to scoop him up to powder him with some clean dust to keep off the last of the summer bugs. But he shrieked at the top of his lungs. "Mine!" he yelled, and clenched the pair of silver keys to his chest, the keys that had fallen out of the zombie's hand as I dragged it. He tried to put them in his mouth. I wrenched them away from him and squeezed him around the middle while I patted him with dust. He screamed until Mom stuck her head out the window, Juliet's bath washcloth dripping in her hand. "Ophelia, what are you doing?" "Just dusting him." "Well, stop it right now. Why is he so upset?" "I took some keys away from him." "Why did you do that?" "Because he found them in the dead, infected hand of a zombie." "Well, wash them and give them back." "What?" "No, come on, don't make me." "Be nice," she said. "You are supposed to teach him." "I know, but Mom." She frowned more intensely. "He is the only little brother that you have, and you would do well to remember that you used to hope that he would be exciting. Now take him and show him how to string the green beans across the shed roof to dry." "Yes, Mom." I dragged him to the shed by the back of his overalls like a string of beans himself. He ran off while I tied a knot in the slick floss that Mom used to string them. But I found him and showed him how to do something more exciting, how to sharpen a stick into a spear. I tried to teach him tricks all week long. I blew little kisses to Juliet, who helped Mom stir pots. But Mom was right. Before I knew What it had meant, I had wished that he wouldn't be boring. I had wished for him to be interesting. I took it upon myself to enjoy his silly games and help make them productive. Every time that Mom frowned at me for yelling at him, I would try to make the boring chores more bearable. In return for teaching him how to do a handstand on the chopping stump, he taught me how to slingshot 3 acorns at a squirrel in a row, so that the third caught it off guard and hit it right in the head. Juliet and I learned this technique of painting our toenails black with mud that didn't flake off when it dried, and we showed him how to start a fire with only a single match. We enjoyed his antics and his occasional focus for long enough to master a new common skill. "That's really great of you, Ophelia. You take good care of them." Dad squeezed my shoulders as we looked out from the deck of the finished gazebo. "Your mom and I are so proud of you." Imogen would be too. I sniffled into his sweaty, sawdusty shirt. Juliet was turning cartwheels, and Hector was hanging from a branch by his knees. They both waved. Juliet blew a kiss. Hector blew his nose. "Come on," he said. "I have an early birthday present for you." Upstairs, in my blue map room, there was a new set of hooks on the wall, next to the hooks where I hung my axe and where I hung my hammer. "Do you know what these extra hooks are for?" Dad asked, eyes gleaming. "No," I perked up. Dad opened my closet, which had been perfectly empty earlier in the day, but now, propped against one wall, was a small rifle. I gasped. "A gun! And we have a whole box of ammo." He pointed to a small cardboard box on the floor full of shells. "I can teach you how to fire it, and maybe in the winter you and I can go hunting for small game." "Okay," I exclaimed, hugging him and then running my fingers over the barrel that he held carefully in his hands, pointed it in the opposite direction from wherever I stood, no matter how I stepped. "But," he said, staring into my eyes seriously, "when I am not with you, this gun, a gun to feed the whole family, is to stay on this wall in your room, no touching it when you're alone." I nodded sincerely. He hung it up on its new hooks at a complementary diagonal to my axe and my hammer. I thought that the cardboard box of shells looked nice with my collection of thick, heavy walking sticks, my map, my sharpened crayons. It fit right in. I delightedly shut myself in the quiet corner of my closet. I closed my eyes in their comforting dark and pictured the new gun hanging on my wall. It had a matte black barrel with a polished cherry stock to hold against my shoulder. It was hanging in my room, next to my closet, ready if Dad or I needed to grab it and fire at the undead from our bedroom window. We could do that now when we had enough ammo, kill the filth at a distance. What a luxury! I wondered how many well pumps Dad had had to fix before he could afford it, and how many more he would have to fix to buy more shells. I dreamed that he and I fixed so many pumps and Mom made so many jars of applesauce that we had boxes and boxes of shells to spare. We killed zombies for the whole county. All of the older girls clapped and cheered and apologized until Dad woke me up and laughed at the crick in my neck from sleeping all night in the closet. "Rise and shine, Creaky," he sang song. "It's party day, and the screen still needs repairing." A deer, of all things, had leapt through the screen, had kicked about in the living room, and then exited through the other side of the house, so I had 2 spots to repair and lots of hoof prints to sweep before the first of the guests arrived. I grumbled as I squatted and reached for the wire. My fingers hurt from winding tiny pieces through tiny holes and then stretching them to wrap around the little pegs on the wooden frame. Mom took Juliet to sweep the kitchen, and Dad left Hector with me while he laid out the firewood that I had chopped for the roasting pit. Hector was actually pretty good at fixing the mesh. His fidgety little fingers were particularly agile at stretching the screen towards the wooden frame. I growled at him to stop dragging his feet around on the floor. "Not," he said, pouting his lower lip. "Nope." A zombie popped up in front of our faces and smushed its broken nose against the screen. I fell backwards. Where had it come from? Mom and Juliet were busy in the kitchen, Dad was fixing potholes in the driveway, and none of us had seen it approaching, nor heard it. And then I realized why. It was an ex-10-year-old zombie boy, wandering around in his football shorts and jersey. His throat had been slit right through his voice pipe. He couldn't make a noise. But his head wasn't flopping very much from the gash in his neck. In fact, it very effectively used its head to ram at us through the screen, ripping the repaired patch. It used its fused spine and skull as a battering ram. Hector handed me my hammer like the smart kid that he was starting to be. I took a swing at it before it could climb all the way in. My hammer collided solidly, but nothing happened. It just crawled closer to us. Hector chattered and squeaked at it. I hit it again, and again, dull thud after dull thud. I broke some of its skin, but no bone. I couldn't crack the skull. I swung faster and faster, hitting it repeatedly, but it wouldn't collapse. It had the thickest cranium I had ever struck. Hector screamed and handed me a hacksaw. I went for the gash already leaking shiny black ooze from the ghoul's neck. I pushed down hard, ripping it back and forth against solid and soft tissue alike until the body stopped flopping. The head lolled and rolled on the floor, still snapping its jaws at us. I used a towel to toss the decapitated head into an aluminum bucket. Hector mimicked the noise. Pang. I kicked the limp body out through the screens onto the sod I had been tending. I sighed. Now I would have to repair the screens and the sod all over again and clean the floors before any of the guests arrived. Hector was too small to lug a whole corpse over to the burn pile, but he was big enough to carry a bucket with a head in it. I pushed it toward him. Take this to the burn pile. He looked up at me. You know how? I asked. He nodded. You need to burn this head because I couldn't break the skull. He nodded again, picked up the bucket and carried it away, singing to himself and swinging it from side to side. I rolled my eyes and reached for the pliers and another piece of twine. There we are, at the end of the funeral chapter. Perhaps next time we will pick up at the picnic chapter. Such a nice title for such a dark but ultimately uplifting horror book. Thanks for joining me for story time. I hope that you get as much out of it as I do.